Hello. My name is Paul Rouse. I'm from Offaly. I thought it's important to start well. I'm delighted to be here, to be invited by Laois Libraries. It's a lovely library, I should say, and I'm delighted to come and be in a library. I think the libraries are more and more important as the heartbeat of communities, and to be in one is a great thing. I'm delighted to be here as part of Heritage Week, which I believe in and like, and I'm delighted to basically see some old friends. I had the pleasure of working for Teddy 30 years ago for the Leinster Express. He was exceptionally decent to me at a time when it was needed, and to meet Alf again, who we soldiered at a number of events. only a few of which did we get in trouble at. I'm delighted as a man who comes from a superior civilization to cross the mountains and to explain hurling to a lot of these people. No, I'm obviously, I was an absolute, I can say all this because I was a spectacularly poor hurler myself. I gave junior hurling a bad name when I tried to play it, but I love it. I love the game. I love Gaelic football. I'm not one of the people who thinks that hurling makes you somehow a morally superior player than individual than someone who plays any other game. But I do love the game. And what I want to try and do over about half an hour is try and talk about Laois's All Ireland victory in 1915. But I want to start on the Saturday night of the 24th of October 1915, where 25 men from this county, which was then known as Queen's County, although it played under Leix or Leix, depending on what way you read it in the GA manuscript. GA minute books are really interesting the way they do the name changes. Leix, Queen's County was changed to Leix, and King's County, Offaly, was changed to Offaly, yeah? And they kind of were adapted in some places and not adapted in others in the great GA way of doing things. But anyway, 25 men from this county were staying in a hotel on Gardiner Street in Dublin, a street many of you will know, not too far from Croke Park, on that Saturday night of the 24th of October 1915. They were in Dublin to play the All Ireland Senior Hurling Final against Cork. They had travelled to the city by train earlier that afternoon. They had their dinner in the hotel in Gardiner Street. They were rubbed down by a couple of masseurs, and they went to bed. After they were gone to bed, officials of the Leix County Board paid 4 men to patrol the corridors of the hotel. Their job was to restrain any of the hurlers who wished to avail of a night in the city. It was done, this decision to put out the bodyguards basically, was taken by one of the star players at the team, Bob O'Keefe, whose name, I suppose, endures through cups and through deeds and through everything he did. He noted in a letter at the time calling for the sentries to be put in place, there is no use in fully depending on any of the players. And you can understand it. Someone's away for a night, they're staying in a hotel and they want to go out. It is thought that no player successfully escaped into the pleasures of Dublin that night. And on the following morning, the Leix players had their breakfast, walked down Gardiner Street, the Gardiner Street Church, that huge street church there, which is still thriving, returned to their hotel, and just after noon, they tugged out into their boots, their socks, their togs, their jerseys, and they put on their overcoats. They were wearing black and amber, horizontally striped jerseys. They crossed Gardiner Square. They walked down Fitzgibbon Street by what is now the Garda station, then was an RIC barracks. They walked down Russell Street and Jones's Road, and they crossed into the newly developed Croke Park. Newly named and newly developed. They had a straightforward mission. They were to beat Cork and to win the county's first ever Senior All-Ireland, thereby avenging the disastrous loss to Clare in the previous year's final. Nonetheless, while Leix were given a chance to win, it was generally accepted that Cork were strong favourites for the match, not least amongst the Cork people themselves, who have not been known for their modesty over the decades. That Leix had made it to the All Ireland Hurling final was due to the work of a new generation of officials who had developed hurling in the county after 1900. At their head was a man called Father J.J. Carney, who was actually a Carlow man. He had graduated from the priesthood, though, and had been basically spent his entire working life as a priest in Queen's County, and he was the key administrator in Leix County Board for more than 15 years. He loved God, obviously, because he was a priest, but it's not clear which he loved more, God or hurling. And in his desire to promote hurling, he was single-minded in his building of structures around the county. He ruled the entire operation of the county board with wisdom and with an unflinching nature. His great ally was Bob O'Keefe. Now, O'Keefe was originally from Mooncoin in County Kilkenny, where he had won a county senior hurling championship. In 1904, a school teacher, qualified as a school teacher, he'd moved to work near Borris in Ossory, and he joined the Kilcotton Hurling Club. He made the Leix team and was so good that he was picked to play for Leinster in the Railway Cup. He was serving as an administrator on the county board while still as a player, and also in the newly formed Leinster committee, Leinster Provincial Committee. He was also involved in that. But led by these two men, Carney and O'Keefe, Leix benefited from new schools competitions. First time ever schools competitions started. Secondly, new club competitions, leagues and championships developed, and also at different levels, not just senior but also junior. And slowly but surely, in the years after 1904, 1905, Leix began to develop better players and become more competitive at county level. These things take time, as anybody knows who's ever tried to build anything in sport at club or county level. So by 1912, they had made the Leinster final. Leix had made the Leinster final, losing very narrowly to Kilkenny. Observers of Leinster hurling could see what was happening, because they were playing tournament matches around the place, and Leix clubs were going and playing tournament matches and were more and more competitive down these years, and they were genuine contenders to win the first time. 1913 didn't go well, however, but in 1914, Carney and O'Keefe took the preparation of the Leix hurling team to new levels. The story of how they managed to do this can be found in a box in the GAA Museum in Croke Park. Now, I want to stop here for 1 second and just put my history hat on to stress the importance of archives and of libraries. It is fundamentally important for every organisation, every club within an organisation, every institution, shops, factories, schools, to keep records for posterity, to allow people understand what happened in the past. And in this instance, you have an incredible treasure trove of documents, letters, files, photographs, team sheets, coaching manuals, everything. It's in a box in the GAA Museum in Croke Park. And it tells the story of how Leix progressed in 1914 through the Leinster campaign. They beat Wexford on the 24th of May by 4 goals and 3 points to 1 goal and 4 points. Note the different scoring in those years. Not so many lads shooting from the middle of the field, tippy-tappy round the pitch, shoot from 100 yards, hand pass, hand pass, hand pass, shoot from 100 yards. This was put the ball in, try and score a goal. And you see it again, the semi-final in Tullamore. Leix beat Dublin by 4-3 to 3-4. Again, loads of goals, not so many points. And amid then, in the final, on the 2nd of August 1914, amid scenes of unbridled joy, Leix beat Kilkenny by a single point in the Leinster hurling final by 3 goals and 2 points to 2 goals and 4 points. Extraordinary scenes are captured in the newspapers from around that time of what happened. What it meant, though, because of the nature of the championship, is that Leix were now through to the county's first ever All Ireland Hurling final. where they would face Clare, who were themselves also in their first ever final. Now, when Clare had won the 1914 Munster Championship earlier or that year, they were reputed to be better prepared for hurling than any team in history. This revolution in preparation had been rooted in past failure. So what do I mean by that? Well, in early 1914, the Clare County Board had opened a subscription fund. And the idea was that they appealed for funds from Clare people, not just in the county and businesses, people who lived abroad, in Dublin, wherever they were in the world, to put money in order, as they said, so that our team can be properly trained and equipped, because we now find ourselves occupying a very insignificant position. The ambition here was to modernise their approach to hurling and to basically put in a training regime which stressed the importance of physical fitness, skill-based drills and practice games. And in Clare, for the 1914 Munster Hurling Championship, that meant players taking a full week off work before championship matches and training in that week full time for hurling. And of course, that's where the subscription fund came in. As a means of fundraising, the Clare chairman, a man called James Sheeran, organised concerts throughout the county as well as taking in subscriptions. And basically, they amassed a war chest in order to do this. And when they progressed through Munster and got to the 1914 All Ireland Hurling Final, they headed for a week in Leix and then in Lisdoonvarna, just as they had done before each of their matches. The Clare County Council owned one car at the time. Another car was owned by a national insurance inspector and another by a local doctor called McDonough. All of them gave their cars to the Leix hurlers for the week before the All-Ireland final so that they could be driven around and wouldn't have to do anything else. And throughout the week before that 1914 final, the Clare players stayed in the Temperance Hotel in the middle of Lisdoonvarna, and among the exercises they undertook were running, walking, hurling, gymnastics and receiving massages. Every man was made to get up at 7 o'clock every morning and to go for a 5-mile walk. And it was insisted that they would be in bed by 10:30 to rest and recuperate. The training was overseen by the trainer of the team, a man called Jim O'Hare, whose father was, who was the father of Micheál O'Hare, later the famed commentator. And he instructed that there should be no drinking or no smoking, because even smoking of any kind is almost as harmful as drinking. This was the time when people thought cigarettes might help moderate your breathing, and was even prescribed by some doctors for people with asthma, which is quite the statement. Whatever about drinking or smoking, there were other distractions, as a letter writer to the Clare champion wrote. He wrote, "Our boys being so good looking, and of course such heroes in the eyes of the fair sex, they attract quite a number of fair ladies to the vicinities of their training quarters every evening, and as a result we have some of the players tripping in the light fantastic toe, which is all very well in its own place and time taken in moderation, but they should not be at it every night, and on no account should they be out after 10. Hearing of the training that was taking place in Clare, an anonymous letter that's now in Croke Park in the archives was sent to the secretary of the Leix County Board. It said the players needed to leave off work and train, because if ye do not, ye will not only be beaten but disgraced. And as it was, the Leix team actually trained together for the 1914 final every day for 3 weeks, full time before that final at the county grounds in Marlborough. My granny Mary Rouse was brought up on the back road between Cloneygown and Clonacadoo on the right side of the border, and she insisted on calling Marlborough till the day she died. And Leix was never Leix, it was always Leaks, and sometimes there was a lisp into it, which was not born out of admiration. But that word of Marlborough was the home point for the training team. For 3 weeks, they trained full time. The annual convention of the Leix County Committee had earlier agreed that a fund should be established to defray the expenses of the senior county teams. And contributions were received from clubs all around Leix, all around Leix people everywhere around the place, outside the county and inside, businesses here as well, politicians, I'll come back to that later. And my own club of Tullamore in Kings County sent £2 to the training fund, so I will be passing a hat later. Index linked, that's quite a significant sum of money, but I leave that to you. To raise money, the committee presented collecting cards, like the way kids go around now to get you to sign stuff for lines that they're doing. Exactly the same thing were done. And receipts were sent to people. And you have people like Murty Collier, who wrote from 22 Arbory Hill, beside Arbour Hill Prison in Dublin, who said he wished he could give more. He was sorry he couldn't, but things are so upset with the war at the moment, the Great War, that we do not have extra money to give. Others, however, were unable to raise any money at all. There was a hurling club at Monadrehead, have I said that right? Monadrehead? In Queen's County, he said they could give nothing because one of their players got badly hurt last month and it cost 10 shillings to get him fixed, and they had no spare cash because of it. The generosity of other donors was rooted in self-interest, including a donation from the owners of Wynn's Hotel on Lower Abbey Street. Wynn's was already established as a venue for GAA supporters and for teams, and it was where Leix teams often had their dinners after matches. Now, what did they need the money for? In a letter to John J. Higgins, the Secretary of the Leix County Committee, Bob O'Keefe stressed the imperative of paying substitute workers to take the places of the hurling team who would miss work. O'Keefe wrote, "We will have to pay a man to take Jim Hyland's place, for example. He's a coach builder, he's working at home, they have a very large family, and they could not very well afford to have Jim away so long without a replacement going in." He mentioned covering the costs of the expenses of all players, and he said, "I understand that this will involve a big sum of money, and it will go near the £80 that I have in my head all along. I would like, if at all possible, to have every man of us free of any loss whatever." In other words, cover the costs so that people can hurl for the county. So for example, replacing EP McAvoy, a farmer's son, cost 10 shillings a week for 3 weeks for a substitute worker, and 1 shilling 3 pence per day for the 16 days it cost him to take the train in from Abbeyleix to Marlborough. The money raised by the training fund was not just used to cover the cost for these employers, or to employ people for substitutes for the hurlers. It was more than that. It was also for meals and for trained players, as I say, and also for a dozen hurling balls. Slitters that were bought from Quigley's of Barrow Street in Dublin, the main supplier in the city at the time off Barrow Street. They were made of the best Irish hide. Not a slitter has been made in Ireland, really, since the 1970s. They're ordinarily now made in the sweatshops of the Far East, but although we all like to pretend that that's not the case. But at this point, these were often hand-stitched balls made from the best Irish hide, and those dozen slitters cost 30 shillings. Another dozen slitters was bought from James Lawler from Three Castles in Kilkenny, while his brother Martin Lawler was asked to make hurleys for the players at a cost of 3 shillings and 6 pence total. There is also the fact. Hold on, what have I done here? How have I done this? Yeah, Leix was fortunate, really, that Marlborough was at a crossing point for trains, because so many of the hurlers were also employed along the railways and were able to get off. But other players worked as bakers, as brewers, and as caretakers, as well as there being a strong farming contingent, as you would expect in a Midlands team. All through the late summer and into the autumn, the Leix hurlers had trained, and then they had done their 3 weeks before the final. They went to the hurling final of 1914 to play Clare in high spirits, and they were hammered. The final score in the 1914 final was Clare 5-1, 5 goals and a point, Leix 1 goal. Defeat to Clare was met with dismay, but not with despair. They knew they were coming. After all, 1914 had brought a first Leinster title, and that in itself was a huge marker of progress amongst counties. And I know that there are people who lament the provincial system. I don't know where to start with that. To me, it's a manageable target at all grades. Anyway, and one of the great things about sport anyway is that a new season always offers up new possibilities. So Leix could look to 1915 with great optimism. At that point in history, the club that won a county's internal championship was the representative of the county, in the provincial championship, and had a right not just to pick the captain, but ordinarily to pick the team, depending on how things worked. Across the GAA, though, a practice had emerged whereby it was expected that the county champions would pick the best hurlers to fit in with their own team. So from that way, it took until the 1920s for this system to develop. It actually started from the very first All Ireland, where Thurles won the Tipperary Championship, were supposed to represent Tipperary, but took the best hurlers from the parishes around them who they'd played in the championship to pack out their team. This continued in a kind of nod and wink basis for years until this practice was formalised, and it was only in the 1920s that proper county teams were put in place. But at this point, this uneasy balance, there was a delicate balance to be struck between avoiding alienating the members of your own club who you had just won a club championship with, and at the same time bringing in the better players from around the place. And there was a second problem. There was also tension between clubs who had competed against each other in the local championship. You will be familiar with such tensions. They haven't really changed enormously over the generations, in my view. And I'll give you an example. I'll give you two examples. In this county in 1915, there was a new and particularly intense rivalry between Ballygeehan and Kilkenny, which was known to be tense. And then there was Clonaslee. After one club match, Bob O'Keefe wrote, "When we have cleared up the doctor's fees after the match with Clonaslee, we may go bankrupt." As an insight into the nature of club hurling at the time, Leix wasn't any different than anywhere else in this. Like this was normal. Nonetheless, against the backdrop of those tensions and the tensions of the Great War, Leix set about winning the All Ireland Senior Hurling Championship of 1915. Under Ballygeehan, who were the county champions for the first time. They had won their first ever county championship in 1914. It was the start of an extraordinary run of success that saw them win 5 championships. They nominated their best player, John Finlay, to captain Leix in 1915. I think John is also known as Jack, but I'm going to call him John because that's how I read about him, and I don't want to presume. I don't like the GAA practice of using someone's nickname when I don't know them, or someone's pet name and doing so. I'll just call him John if that's okay with people here. There were 6 other Ballygeehan players on the team, and the balance were drawn, well, from round here. Rathdowney, Leix, Ballacolla, Rapla, Kilcotton and the environs. Finlay was progressive in his approach to training. He actually believed that there had been a mistake made in 1914. He thought they had been hindered when they went up to play Clare by the fact that they had trained too hard, too long, too intense and without a break. And he wrote to O'Keefe and to Carney, which is no mean thing to do to two men who were doing, but every institution depends upon dissent and dissenting voices for it to prosper properly, as we can see from Trump's White House. So some of the fact that hindered by the fact that they had trained too hard, he believed. And he said some of the players on our team are not able to stand the training that they went through. Early in 1915, Finlay wrote to every one of his players, urging them to do everything they can to win the All Ireland. He says, we can do this by acquiring the staying powers and the speed necessary for a player to do his best for the whole of an hour's hard play. He said that our players should initially go on long, slow runs reaching a distance of 3 miles. And then they should start to build in sprints of up to 50 yards into those runs. Anybody who is still involved in training teams knows exactly what that is. That's winding. That's how you get the stamina to be able to deliver. And in the Leinster semi-final of that year, again in Tullamore, Leix duly beat Kilkenny by 4 goals and 1 point to 2 goals and 6 points on the 6th of June 1915. The victory was a sweet one. It also brought a less than wholesome reaction from the losers. It was one thing to lose to Leix in 1914. You could clap them as the plucky upstarts or once off is grand. Happens a second time, not quite as enjoyable. In fact, the 2 in a row was sickening. So Kilkenny lodged an appeal with the Leinster Council. They argued that one Leix player was standing in the wrong position when a free was taken that led to a crucial goal. As a result, Kilkenny looked for a replay. Now, I have to say, this is not unusual at the time. There were many championships that were won in these years in the committee room, and that's something that lasted for 100 years and more within the GAA. Appeal and counter-appeal over the most spurious of circumstances is just standard fare in these years. Kilkenny looked for a replay anyway. Leinster Council said no. So Leix are in the Leinster final where they meet Dublin. And in the middle of August, no great rush to play these matches, so they waited basically 2 months before they played Dublin, and they duly completed the 2 in a row. It was then that the preparations to win the All Ireland really kicked in. Money was raised again through new appeals to supporters, and it was a refined training regime with elaborate drills set down on pages and sent to every player for them to follow. Copies are in the museum of those practice drills for catching, for dribbling, for striking, for sideline pucks, for free pucks, and in particular for fighting for possession. In the drill, which worked on fighting for possession, it was proposed to send the ball a small distance so that 2 players would fight for it, as the guide said, somewhat like 2 dogs fighting for a hare. Again, it's the type of drill that anyone who's involved in the hurling team knows still goes on. Put the ball down between 2 and let them at it, or between 4, whatever. In the 2 weeks before the All-Ireland final, the Leix players came together to train 3 times a week. So they didn't make the mistake of going 5 again. They went 3 times a week for 2 hours only on each occasion. To do this, some had to secure permission for their employers to leave work at 2 p.m. in order to be in Marlborough to train before the light faded. A significant input into the training was also made by Father Carney, who wrote to every player himself, stressing the importance of speed and intensity. He said, there will be no time against Cork for fancy play or raising the ball. Men should practice striking ground balls when running at top speed. In other words, this is going to be a contest. We'll turn it into a contest, make it fast and hard and move the ball quickly. Carney, in tandem with other members of the county board, went still further. He believed the team needed outside expertise if they were to win the All-Ireland. He went and asked the great Kilkenny hurler, Dick Drúg Walsh, to take charge. Walsh knew everything about winning championships. He had recently retired from the Kilkenny team, having won 7 All-Irelands, 3 of them as captain. He duly agreed to come up to Marlborough and help with the training. He did some work with the team, including bringing up some Kilkenny hurlers to play against the Leix ones in practice before the game. On 3 successive Sundays before they played Cork, they basically played a prototype Kilkenny team. The players were given then, just before the final, a document with typewritten notes on it. It was called Notes for Players Previous to Match. It stressed the work they had done. It stressed what they were representing. It stressed the importance of moving the ball quickly. It stressed the importance of playing unselfishly. and concluded with one sentence: the team possessing the greater speed and dash will win. I would suggest that that's probably still the case in hurling very, very often. But courage also mattered. The GAA's propagandists repeatedly stressed at this period the discipline of the men in its ranks. P.J. Devlin, who wrote under the pseudonym Celt, there's a book he wrote called Our Native Games. Some people here may have it or may have read it. He acknowledged that the early games of hurling under GAA rules could be more than a little tempestuous. He said that now this had changed and that we now had a scientific sport. His words were echoed by Father James Dollard, who also wrote in the GAA Annual of 1907 that the brawls and fights of the early years had disappeared from the GAA, and now common sense and moderation are practiced. There was an element of wishful thinking in this. The capacity of GAA matches, and in particular hurling matches, to descend into a certain anarchy may have lessened somewhat, but only somewhat. This was particularly true for club matches, but even inter-county matches could be brutal. And that year's Leinster Senior Hurling Championship was a great example. When Cork played Limerick in the semi-final of that competition, the Freeman's Journal was moved to what it called, inverted commas, in the great GAA language of the time, the regrettable incidents at Thurles. That kind of covers, you can imagine what that covers. So basically what happened was 14,000 people had come to the sports ground in Thurles to see Limerick play Cork. The ball was thrown in, there was timber broken everywhere, there was a little bit of a row, but it settled a small bit, kind of, until 4 minutes into the match, 2 players threw down their hurls and started to box. Somewhat excited by the fight, they were joined by several spectators who ran in from the sidelines, as well as team management and other subs. Peace came relatively quickly. That's what the report says. I'm not sure what relatively means in that context. But anyway, stewards came in and they cleared the field, but just as they were finished clearing the field, a player and a spectator, one from each county, also ended up in another fight. And more joined in, and all attempts to clear the pitch proved futile. So the referee had no option, he felt, but to abandon the match. So a Munster hurling final was abandoned in 1915 and the championship was delayed. The GAA had obviously modernised over 20 years, and the organisation of the games was much better than it had been previously, but primal passions are not easily dispelled, and we all know that it's not unknown that they rise again. Cork eventually came out of Munster. They too trained assiduously for the final. As well as training collectively, many players at the time trained in their own regime. I'll just say here that I am lost in admiration for the training that people who play Gaelic games do now. It's unbelievable, really, the commitment. But we wouldn't want to fool ourselves into thinking that this is the first generation to actually train. You go back through the records from Morris Davin onwards, who built his own gym in the early 1880s at his farm on Carrick, all the way through to find people who are incredibly committed and determined and practiced all the time. So the idea of a generation having a monopoly on preparation, I'd be slow to claim that. Anyway, one of the stars of the Cork team in 1915 was a man called Larry Flaherty. He had won an All Ireland back in 1903, but trained so hard and loved hurling so much that he was still hurling in 1915. He developed a training regime which saw him train on a hill behind his house in Douglas, starting at 5:30 every morning. He went out and he followed a regime of running, as well as jumps, as well as tying a 6-pound weight to his hurley before working on his swing. I should say that Larry Flaherty lived into his 90s, and he was interviewed in the Cork Examiner in the middle of the 1970s after watching a hurling match on television. And he was asked what he thought about it, and his quote is brilliant. He says, "To be honest, I don't like watching fellas doing things which I sometimes feel I could still do better myself." He said. So anyway, he obviously lost none of his sense of self over the years. On their passage to that 1915 final, Cork had defeated Tipperary, Limerick in the semi-final, and the defending Munster champions Clare to win the Munster Championship. For that Munster final, many members of the Leix team had gone down to watch Cork beat Clare. And in inverted commas, as Bob O'Keefe said, each man was there to observe the style of his opponent. It's his video analysis before there was video. In the national press, there was comprehensive coverage before the All-Ireland final. It's kind of brilliant to watch over those first 20 years of the GAA, the manner in which year after year more and more press flowed into the games, particularly after 1900. One of the journalists who was writing was a man called Frank Dineen. Frank Dineen was the guy from, apparently involved in the IRB at one stage, but then had bought Croke Park and sold it to the GAA and made a few pound. And in 1915, he was working as a journalist. He wrote a preview of the game for the Freeman's Journal. He went down to Marlborough, and then he went on to interview the Leix captain, John Finlay, in his house. Dineen, when he wrote the article, there's a great interview with John Finlay in the paper. And he says, Finlay seems to have adopted the pose which was later to become so associated with GAA teams through the years. So this is how Dineen put it. He said, "Speaking to Mr. John Finlay, I was made to think that they had not the slightest expectation of defeating Cork. Across the table, John Finlay was a quiet, unassuming, social, country gentleman who would talk of everything but hurling." In other words, we're not going to give anyone any chance here to say that we're not going to give anyone a goose to cook, basically, before the final. On the morning of Sunday, the 24th of October, 1915, the morning that the Leix hurlers woke in their beds in the Gardiner Street Hotel, special trains were run from Cork and from Queen's County, but also across the hurling heartlands of Tipperary, of Limerick, of Galway, of Kings County, of Kilkenny and of Waterford. In all, in fact, the Great Southern and Western Railways put on 17 special trains to bring people to Dublin in the middle of the Great War to watch the All Ireland Senior Hurling Final. It is said GAA attendances are fantastic to watch. You never really know what's going on, particularly when there's tax being paid on the number of people go in. They say there's 12,000 at the game. There could have been way more than that. There could have been a few less, who knows. But they paid £362 declared in gate receipts on the day. Among the crowd was the former world heavyweight boxing champion Jack Johnston, who was visiting from America. The crowd would most likely actually have been better but for the wetness of the day. And as it turned out, the planning of the Leix County Board and its players manifested itself even on the morning of the game. It was a deluge, and the Cork team went out onto the field. And the Leix team, when they came out, left it a little bit and then came out with their overcoats on for the start. The Irish Independent was later to comment that the appearance of the Leix men was somewhat unconvincing because they all wore their Macintoshes. It was, however, a decision rooted in common sense. On top of that, the county board had brought resin to put on the handles of the hurleys to improve the grip, and Cork had not done this. The referee, William Walsh, who refereed the match using an RIC man's whistle, threw in the ball to start the game at 2:54 p.m. exactly. And Cork started as if they were sure to justify their position as favourites and scored 3 goals early on. 3 goals at the start of an All-Ireland final. What a start. But Leix had the experience of the previous year when they had folded under the Clare onslaught. and were ready for it on this occasion. They settled midway through the half, didn't cancel the lead entirely, but they got back 2 goals of their own. And by the interval, they had knocked over 2 more points and they trailed by just 1 point at half-time. The second half was there. This was where everything would be decided. And as so often happens in matches still, it is the first minutes of the second half which sets the tone, the momentum, and ultimately the decision. And indeed, the game was won in the first minutes of the second half. The rain got worse, but Leix drove and drove and drove, and they scored 3 quick goals of their own and pressed Cork into a corner, despite the fact that Cork rallied and got 1 late goal. When the final whistle was blown, the score stood at Leix 6 goals and 2 points, Cork 4 goals and 1 point. In Cork, the view was, I'm nearly finished, the view was that the match was decided in favour of Leix because of the rain which had stopped their boys hurling. The Cork Examiner complained that when the hurling ball was thrown up, it was as if one side was armed with stout ash come-ons and the other side with frail tennis rackets. And Leix certainly weren't the lads equipped with the tennis rackets. By contrast, for the Leix players, officials and supporters, there were huge celebrations. The team travelled home by train to Marlborough, repeatedly singing Lovely Leix and also throwing in the Kilkenny standard, the Rose of Moon coin, as a nod to Bob O'Keefe. Bonfires blazed all across the county as reported in the press. There was a procession through Abbey Leix where John Finlay was carried shoulder high behind a pipe band. Congratulatory, I knew I wasn't going to be able to say that, letters arrived from many parts, not least from the House of Commons, where Sir Algernon Coote wrote, the MP, "Will you convey my hearty congratulations to the Leix team upon winning the hurling championship?" A telegram also arrived from the Nationalist MP for Queen's County, Patrick A. Meehan. Now, I was going to break off here and say something about the politics of the GAA and its supposed nationalist aspect in 1915, but if you want, I'll answer a question about that. I'm not going to go into a divergence on it, except to say that the amount of nonsense that is spoken about the nationalism of the GAA is remarkable, and it strips the entire organisation of its complexity. However, to conclude, on hurling, we go back to Frank Dineen, who spoke about Bob O'Keefe in his match report and talked about the dedication of himself and Carney across 15 years of preparing a team to win a championship, and of the players who had added through it all the way, but specifically about Bob O'Keefe. He wrote, "His hair has turned grey at the game, for he has now been over 20 years behind the hurley. He has had a long and successful a career as any hurler has, and no one who ever knew him will begrudge him his All-Ireland medal or any of his teammates." There was gratitude too amongst the players and the county board for the work which the administrators had done. Clubs and players came together and struck a special commemorative watch worth £25, which was given to Father J.J. Carney for what he had done for all of them over the previous years. It had taken more than a decade of hard work and of planning, but it had worked, and Leix were All-Ireland champions. Thank you. If anyone wants to ask a question, I'll try and answer it, and if you don't, we can go.
Well, Jack Fendick became a team.
Is what?
Jack Fendick became a team.
Did he?
He did. And my grandfather picked the team at Farm Cross, where I lived. And I was in the county council. And I have a monument erected that team. And we brought Reiners and Cork up must be 25 years. And Reiners and Cork played.
Yeah.
And they took off the coats at halftime.
Yeah. Well, I think they took. No, hold on now. Hold on. I don't think
I
they
was
did.
told this by my father.
I don't think they played the full first half in their coats.
Oh, they didn't. They didn't take them up until halftime. They were weather went dry. And they were like peers after that. And then back, whose son was a dentist. He was from Aberdeen. And there were several people that my father heard as well.
Who's your father?
John Finley.
John Finley.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to.
And he was involved in.
Grandfather was a sick.
Okay.
Yeah. I was involved in. But when I was on the council, I put up a plan where the teams picked. And the party that night was an old big loft. And there was 2 barrels of beer sent up from Cunningham. And there was a big loft and a little loft. And they joined by a bridge. And they went out to my horse field under.
So I'm not going to get into an argument with you. No. We're not with your back up here anyway. And but I will say the newspaper reports say they kept their coats on them. And the match started, and they put them on at half time, and they came out in the second half and hurled without them. That's what I read in the papers at the time. We won't argue over it.
The Cork side said they were beaten because they got drunk before the match. The historians that talking about when they came.
There was a row in the dressing room, I'm sure.
But that team in Ballygeehan was supposed to be informed in the townsend of Ballygeehan.
Yeah.
Rather than in the village of Ballacolla to keep the boys from going to the pub in Ballacolla. That's the theory of it. My father used to say.
So you know the whole thing about the parish being the most important thing in the GAA. But the truth of it is these townlands, there were townlands all the time set up. There were townlands set up everywhere where there were teams. Like I'll give you an example, Tubberdora, which is a townland in Tipperary. What parish is it again? Borlahan, yeah. Thank you. So Tubberdora won 3 All Irelands in 4 years, and the Tubberdora history is brilliant. The cabinet said they retired because, like Alexander the Great, they'd no known worlds left to conquer, which I thought was brilliant. But that was a townland as well, and all across the place, you can see teams that were set up that were based on townlands, and then they thrived. So it wasn't just parish.
Or can I ask you a question?
100%.
What happened subsequently then? I mean, we won the All Ireland in 1915. We seem to go into hibernation after that. And also Clare, and they didn't come for another 40 years. What happened really?
Well, it's hard, isn't it? Like, it's hard to be from a smaller county and go and it goes.
It's a big county, like, it's a great hurling county. Like, they didn't win All Ireland until 95 or 97.
But again, it was a poor county as well in some respects, and it's dwarfed by larger counties around it, and it's so easy, it's so hard to get there, and so easy to slip back.
It sounds so professional, like, as you say, like in 1915, when they come with.
Yeah, and they came again in 1916. They're very close in 1916 again and fell away. No, they'd slipped away, but they were always competitive. Just didn't have enough. But again, emigration from Leix was huge.
Few of those Leix lads won All Ireland with Dublin.
Yeah, so that's.
1 or 2 of them.
You can see there's a couple of them won in the 24 team. So they go away, but you can see it as well in New York. Leix lads hurling in New York. Actually, they hurled with Offaly lads in New York and really successfully in the 20s. It's one of those things. I think it's hard when it's a small group of people who are driving something. You can see it in your clubs as well. When there's a small group of people doing a lot of work, you can do it for a while and then it gets fruition, and then it's very hard unless there's rejuvenation.
Well, after the Civil War, that's when the players went to Dublin. Left Leix. There was 3 of them on the 24 team.
Yeah.
I worked with a man from Clare, Fado, and before Clare won again. And his comment was, Leix won it in 1915, Clare 1914. The rest of the country were fighting in the war.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
You mentioned there the archives in Dublin.
Yeah.
That sounds like a gem that you found, and you've present my appetite to look what's in that box. Can you just walk into the?
So what you do is you write to if you go onto the website, Croke Park website, you write to the archivist there. He's a really Adam Heffernan, really sound fella, but his email address is there, and you book an appointment to go in and look at them. Basically, what happened was somebody put away all of those documents and kept them, and they were sold at auction in the early 2000s. I don't know exactly when, and I don't know how much is played, but they were acquired by the Croke Park.
There's a relation of Higgins.
Yeah, they're called the O'Higgins collection. You're absolutely right, Teddy.
I knew the man that actually had him. He kept it quiet all right, you know, but it was great that it was kept for the GA.
Yeah,
It's a wonderful resource.
yeah. It's
Talked about hurling at the time and about the times anyway, like, you know.
it's kind of amazing that it's the only collection that has survived.
O'Higgins collection.
The O'Higgins collection, yeah. It's the only thing that's survived that's anywhere like it at all. Everything else you have to plough through the newspapers to try and find the stuff on.
What was in it, like scrapbooks and
No scrapbooks. It's actually letters between players, letters between the county board and players, letters looking for money around the place, and hurling drills.
how much they were getting the expenses and whatnot?
Yeah.
And did they charge you anything for that?
No,
No.
remarkably.
It's a bit like the Guinnesses actually. If you go to Guinness,
You can go in, yeah.
My grandfather worked in Guinness's. Yeah, I can see all his records. It was fabulous. 18. So if anyone knows, it's a bit like that. You log onto their website and you can book an appointment.
It's exactly the same. Yeah.
And they give it to you free.
Yeah.
Sorry, I have to go to Trummer to GA that or something. I loved your talk, by the way.
Thank you. Thanks, William. Thanks for coming. Thank you.
Do you know much about subs in those days? A granduncle of mine called Jack Lopeman was on the Leinster, played in the Leinster final. Then he was a sub on the team in the final. And apparently subs were only used if there were injuries. There were none of the way subs are used nowadays for tactics or that is taken off or your super subs and all that stuff. They were only put on if there were injuries.
Yeah, or death. And even then, yeah. It was that, like a fella you'd have to be fairly seriously injured to come off. And the tradition, so I started to play senior in Offaly in the 1980s, in the late 80s, and 87 was my first year playing senior in Offaly. And in that year, you basically pretended, if you were being taken off, you pretended to limp off because it was still there. I'm sure people here in this room have done the limping as well, but you pretended to be taken off. So yes, so it's led to, so the whole thing about teams and who was on teams and who wasn't on teams has led to the most unbelievable conflicts going back to the very first All Ireland. There was an amazing photograph of the Thurles team from '87 that won the first All Ireland Championship, and they're a group of people who look as old as me sitting in their photos. They're big men and their jerseys pulled over their things, and they've stood for this photo. But the photo was taken in 1908 from the 1887 final, and there was in that photo are lads who played in the final and people who weren't playing at all. So that caused trouble. Then they didn't get their medals until 1913, and some players on the morning of that game, 7 players were left on the platform, and other players had been brought in. So there was a dispute over who would get it. And then the last person from those teams who stayed alive was a man called Tom Stapleton. And he gave an interview before he died in which he claimed to score the winning goal in the final. So it's not just who wins who writes the history, it's those who live longest when it comes to poor records. So it's really tricky. It's really tricky to know. Some programs don't survive. There are some programs from matches that survive, and sometimes there's good listings in the papers, but there is no full record. And anybody who tells you there's a full record of All Ireland winning teams is talking silage. That's a technical term.
Who selected the team? Was there a team, a group of selectors, or someone was telling me that the actual team captain?
Yeah. So the captain, the county chairman, and other people who are around the place could be involved in it.
But it wasn't just the team captain?
No, definitely not.
No, right, so.
Definitely not.
Just what you mentioned about nationalism in the GA being more complex than what it's thought.
Yeah.
Do you mean like that, for example, hurling back then would have been played by people from a unionist background before independence? Or
What I mean by that is that when you read the GAA histories from the 1920s onwards, you would wonder how the British managed to hold Ireland for as long as they did, given the devout nationalism of an association which had so many members. And the truth of it is that, for example, in 1915, there were enormous numbers of Leix people from this county who were fighting in the British Army in the Great War, to the extent where Leix were going to put a motion to the county board, which never actually went, to say that members of the British Army could be allowed to be members of the GAA. Number one. Number two, there were more GAA men fighting in France in the Battle of the Somme than were in the GPO in 1916. Events which were a couple of months apart. What we have, however, is a retrospective fitting of a nationalist slant of history, as nationalism always does. Imperialism, by the way, does exactly the same thing, imposes a rationale onto events which strips out all complexity, anything that doesn't fit the simplified cartoon narrative of us against them, strips it all out and presents you with a lie. And the lie here is that the GAA was devoted to nationalism. It wasn't. And I'll answer any more questions anybody wants on that with gratitude.
just that MP who didn't congratulate Leix.
Yeah.
For the All Ireland win. You mentioned one was a nationalist, but was the other?
I think Coote was unionist. Like from my reading of it, he was unionist. See, it's before the franchise was fully expanded for the 1918 election, and you have people then like Lord Castletown here, who on the one hand could speak Irish and was sympathetic towards Land League to some extent, and on the other hand was a massive egotistical, went around the world shooting elk and deer and lived, and elephants, lived the life of a member of the British aristocracy in this county.
And that man I mentioned, Jack Lopeman, and his brother shot his horses.
Shot. I thought you said shot. That's why he was a sub. He was shooting horses.
Was the rule the rule preventing crown?
Oh yeah, that was there from 1901. Introduced 1901, between 1901 and 1905. That was introduced.
Well, a lot of GAA fellas played cricket that time as well.
They did. Huge game across the Midlands, down in Kilkenny. Cricket was a massive game in Kilkenny. So you people like Laurie Maher's family were involved.
Front field,
Sorry, yeah.
Jack Finley, the captain, his front field was a cricket ground. My grandfather was a cricket umpire at the time.
Oh.
And most of the GAA players from around the parish played cricket as well.
It's one of those things where, so Michael Cusack, I don't know how we've got onto this, but Michael Cusack in 1882, 2 years before he founded the GAA, wrote a newspaper column in which he called for a cricket club to be established in every parish in Ireland. He said it would give boys, never girls, give boys the chance to demonstrate their pride and the honour of the village by walking to the crease and scoring a six. In November 1882, he offered advice to GAA men, or to boys, on how to store their cricket bats for the winter, using linseed oil, so that they wouldn't deteriorate and could be used again in the spring. And he flipped in the summer of 1882 because of 3 reasons, more or less, I think. Now, with Cusack, you have to always remember that Cusack was a genius. Russian literature, French literature, mathematician, wrote a newspaper column every week in which he explained magic tricks and did all manner of different things. But there was nobody who he couldn't fall out with. And I'll give you an example. There was a man who he was very friendly with in Dublin circles called John Dunbar, and after the GAA was founded, Cusack's organisation, Dunbar set up a different organisation called the Irish Amateur Athletic Association, and they banned each other from each other's events. Archbishop Croke got involved and said, lads, small country, you need to come together. So Cusack wrote to the newspapers, to John Dunbar, and wrote to Croke, but published it in the newspaper saying, Dear John, I received your letter this morning and I burned it. Yours sincerely, Michael Cusack. So he was volatile, number one, but 3 things happened. He was involved in a new organisation for the restoration of Irish. called Aontacht na Gaeilge. Now, Aontacht na Gaeilge is an amazing organisation. It's the forerunner of Conradh na Gaeilge and everything to do with Douglas Hyde and the revival in the 1890s. But Aontacht na Gaeilge, to give it its full name, was the Gaelic Union for the Preservation and the Cultivation of the National Language. The full name of the GAA is the Gaelic Athletic Association for the Preservation and Cultivation of the National Games. Number one. Number two, the Land League, the land agitation was in full flower at that stage, so there was home rule coming in there. Number three, there was an exhibition beside where Cusack lived in Dublin about Irish-made goods, saying, listen, we don't need the goods of empire. We will make our own. So all of these things are happening, and most importantly of all, a history of Cuchulainn, a popular edition, the first one ever, was published in 1882, called Cuchulainn an Epic. And he read it and he wrote about it in the papers. And in Cuchulainn an Epic, what happened in that was Cuchulainn was used hurling to demonstrate his heroism. And Cusack wrote in the newspaper column to say, it is my duty now to restore hurling in Ireland. So everything flowed. He never again talked about cricket and flipped from cricket to hurling.
Do you know the way around or is no apparent?
Yeah.
Is that developed from that or where did that come from?
So, yeah, no.
You know the way
Yeah. What the GAA did was, it said, we're going to bring back hurling. We're going to restore this game, modernise it, put in modern rules, set up clubs, spread the game. Bring it out of history, basically, and save it. What it said was, we're going to take control of athletics in Ireland, because for the first 35 years, the GAA was predominantly an athletics organisation. We're going to organise athletics and we're going to take control of it. They said, soccer and rugby were spreading in the country. We're going to take it on. So they invented a game which they called Gaelic football, published the first rules for it on the 17th of January, 1885, and basically invented it and said, this is our football, we'll push against these. So the game they picked to push against cricket was rounders. Now, the idea that hitting the ball with a stick is somehow profoundly Irish is remarkable. So all kinds of every culture for which we have a record, anywhere in the world, people kick a ball, they run, they fight, and they strike a ball with a stick. We are not exceptional, except that what happens here is exceptional to us. We do something that is done all across humanity, both in moving stick and ball games, and in stationary games where you hit a ball. So what happens is, we decided they were different. We decided everything was different because all of these organisations were constructed in the middle of the creation of nation states and the idea that identity could be represented through your sport. That's more or less what was there. So we pulled in rounders as our opposition to cricket.
Do you reckon Gaelic football was kind of invented as a kick and catch game to counter soccer and rugby, for example, or was there records?
Gaelic football wasn't a kick and catch game for years. Kerry brought emotion to the annual congress of the GAA in 1902 to say there should be no handling in Gaelic football. You're very welcome. There should be no handling in Gaelic football. So the game was 21 aside until the early 1890s. The ball is on the ground. There are men going in every direction. It was a rolling scrum. Right, 1890s into the early 1900s, it began to open out. Catch and kick really came into it around the time Leix won this All Ireland. So,
like there are records of hurling going back like
yeah.
Is it the same for Gaelic football or was it really?
Football. No such thing as Gaelic football. No such thing as association football. No such thing as rugby football. You go back before 1863 and there is just football. Just football. And football, there's Calcio Fiorentina in Italy. There's La Soule in France. Anywhere you go, you can find these games. You want to see stick and ball games? Go and see what the Berbers were at in North Africa. Go and see what was happening in lacrosse. Go and look at what's happening in Iceland or Denmark or Indonesia or where any culture you want, you can find examples of people doing, it's basically people finding different ways of doing the same thing. I don't know how we ended up in Indonesia from Ballygeehan, but we go home.